The house. How can I describe it? Old, to start, situated in a leafy, nearly hidden corner of a square, halfway between Rathmines and Ranelagh. You would not think that much of it either way. The park in the centre of the square was spacious and pleasant, but seeing as most of the time I spent there was in the cold months, or else I didn't have much time, I rarely visited. I used to walk to Dublin city centre, sometimes alone, always alone then. I can't remember the route well, but it would take you at some point through Camden Street and then onto George's Street. Anyway, in the front garden there was a tree, and I can't remember the colour of the front door, but when you opened it the first thing to notice was shabby lilac. Just that, shabby lilac, everything lilac and old. It seemed such an odd colour to have chosen for the entrance hallway. Ruth was the landlady, with long grey hair, and she was scatty and so warm and friendly. She used to come every Thursday or Friday for the rent, very sweetly, very pleasantly, never demandingly, and sit in her office room on the ground floor, counting money and going through the rubbish to separate it, never, I noticed, washing her hands afterwards. She would chat and ask us how our lives were, how things were going in the drab office I worked at, how Emily and Meredith's music studies were going, how Kate was doing at her work, how Eileen's business course was going, and how the couple who lived in the very back room downstairs and mostly kept to themselves were doing. Built in the Georgian period, this house had since been divided into bedsits, each a self-containing unit but with shared bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. And so on a Thursday evening you would pay your €85 to Ruth against her backdrop of untidy boxes and bags piled to the ceiling in her little office, go back upstairs over the worn-down rough carpet and take a 50-cent piece from the pile everyone had to make sure to have, pop one in the meter for another little while of heat. It was then that I realised the expense of electric heating, furthermore almost useless against the cracks and spaces in the huge sash windows and the thin curtains that did almost nothing. It was so different when the weather was nice, though. When I want to describe what my little room was like, as well as all the others, perhaps it is enough to say it was old, awfully old, brown, grey, white, sad, with a little kitchenette corner by the window with a sink, kettle, and tiny fridge. I didn't do much cooking then, though. Meredith and Emily used to go home at the weekends, but on nights that we were all in, we had such fun. The bright, talented musicians they were, and all their friends from college, coming over, all of us crowded into one room or another to share the heat and some drinks and much laughter, everyone contributing to the 50-cent pile, and when someone had to enter or leave, we would take great care to open the door only as much as needed and pass through as fast as we could before the icy blast could do its damage. It was indeed a cold house. On early mornings I was usually alone, getting ready for work and the walk to the office, traipsing up around the spiral staircase to the second floor. Not once did I feel at ease going up those steps. In all my months there, not once did I look in the mirror and not fear seeing or expect to see another face besides mine. It's all the decor, I would tell myself time and time again, probably every day. I had always liked ghost stories as a child, but had forgotten all of that nonsense since then. I presumed the age and attitude of the house was making me rather silly about such ideas. When you live somewhere that makes you feel like that, the last thing you want to do is examine the idea more closely. Label it as overactive imagination and don't dare to push further, and certainly not give words to such thoughts until the time comes when you no longer spend nights there. The downstairs bathroom wasn't much better, but I certainly had no choice in that matter, as that was the only place where one could wash. And I don't mean a nice shower or anything modern like that. In such a house, an old bath was all that we had. You would walk down the stairs, past Emily's room, past Ruth's little office room, past the payphone under the stairs on the right, down the lilac sloping corridor to the bathroom on the left, just before Kirsty and Adam's room, where the door was always closed, with muffled television or music coming from within. Brush my hair while waiting for 50 cents worth of warm water to trickle into the old tub, folding my clothes on the chair, and feel constantly as if I was being watched. It wasn't an unwelcoming feeling, simply slightly troubling to be so aware of it all the time. Now that I look back, I've never felt so watched or such a presence ever anywhere else since, regardless of age or decor or attitude. There was no shower head, so I would run the water from the tap over my hair directly, trying to get everything over and done with as soon as possible, and get back to the relative coziness and safety of my strange little bed that was set into the wall, almost kind of like a bed on a train or in a cupboard, as if there should have been curtains to close it off, but there were none. Nothing scary ever happened in that bathroom, except for once I got a little fright. The hall and bathroom light were on a timer, seeing as there was no one paying through their meter for these. You had 15 minutes to be in and out if you didn't want to leap dripping from the bath to hit the switch. Well, on this night, time got away from me a little, I suppose, and while I was lying there, soaking my hair in the silence and cool air, trying to stay under the warmish water as much as possible, the lights suddenly went out. And exactly at the same time, the church bells in Ranelagh rang out for midnight. A little fright, a funny coincidence, but not much more. I remember one night Meredith and I did bring up the topic of ghosts. She believed the house was haunted, though she had never seen anything. Her friend, who was there that night, one of those people who professes to be able to detect spirits, assured me that she did indeed feel presences in the house, strong presences. Just then, and this building had a thing for good timing and a sense of humour, it seemed, because no sooner had the words left her lips, with her eyes on my eyes, we heard a terrible shriek from downstairs. It was Emily. We looked at each other and knew we were all thinking the same thing. We ran to her, she ran to us, and on the stairs we met in the middle, and she told us in a teary panic how something had gone flying off the shelf right beside her head. But it was a mouse, she said, and so we would have to do something about this and tell Ruth and so on. Was she sure it was a mouse? I pressed, concerned, and to be honest a bit thrilled that perhaps we had wakened something with our talk of such things. But no, it was a mouse, and that was the reason for the terror, for Emily was one of these girls who was very afraid of small creatures. There were other disturbing moments too, that were decidedly unrelated to any spirit world that may or may not have been overlapping the known world in our corner of Belgrave Square. I have said that the couple who lived downstairs at the back usually kept to themselves. Yet sometimes they would become very chatty, very friendly, although seemingly immensely sleepy, eyes slightly drooping, standing at our bedroom doors after asking to borrow this, that, or the other, for longer than one would think necessary or normal. There would be a drop of blood on the arm of Kirsty's white pyjama top, and yet her makeup was always perfectly applied. When they shuffled back to their darkened lair, we spoke about them in hushed tones, wondered what it was they were addicted to. Surely it couldn't be that. Wouldn't they be in a worse state? But I didn't know much about anything in those days. Kirsty was always talking about her work in the spa in Rathmines, I think. Not the one closest to us, but the next one, so I never saw her at the counter, conveniently. She worked nights. So many shops were really getting into the 24-hour opening thing in those days. Meredith used to remark to me how dressed up Kirsty would get just for work. She said every night she would hear the clack, clack, clack of Kirsty's high heels as she walked down the front path and out onto the road. Clack, 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 every night. Curly blonde hair, perfect makeup, and then at home, heavy eyelids and a drop of blood. Well, I found out once and for all one night that something was very wrong. We were having a sort of get-together. Some people were over, in Meredith's and Kate's room, but mostly in mine, and I left and started to go down the stairs, perhaps to the shop or something. I stopped dead in my tracks 1/3 of the way down, because in the hall below, barely managing to stay upright, was Adam. He was stumbling and falling. I stared. His feet were bare and terribly swollen. I was frozen. He hadn't seen me, but I didn't want to move. "Are you okay?" I asked him after a while. He looked at me. His eyes were like they were seeing another world, and he mumbled something. I stayed in the same spot. I didn't want to go downstairs because I was afraid of him, but I didn't want to go upstairs in case he followed me and scared everyone else. And eventually he stumbled down the corridor to his room again, and I returned upstairs, shaken. After that we saw less and less of Kirsty and Adam, until we saw nothing more of Adam at all. Kirsty had told Meredith that Adam was beating her. One morning in late spring, shortly before I left, Kirsty had a postcard in her hand and breezily told Meredith and I that Adam had run away and joined a cult in California. "Well, imagine that," I said to myself, "and I wonder how he got the money to get over there." As I said, I didn't know much about much in those days, and looking back now, I suppose I wasn't as suspicious as the intervening years have made me, for it wasn't until a great deal of time had passed, and I was telling a friend of the whole thing, that no sooner were the words out of my mouth than I realized it. It would be a rather transparent cover-up if someone were to mysteriously go missing. I have just one more final, unsettling tale to add to these memories of the house in Belgrave Square, and although it is the scariest, and probably one of the most fearfully spent nights in my life, I bid you to not expect too much thrill, and much less in the way of an explanation. As I have said, our electricity ran on individual meters. 50 cents would get you perhaps a little more than an hour of heat, or a day of illumination from the old light bulbs. Well, I was usually well prepared and had the meter stocked ahead, but I must have forgotten to fill it up one evening, and also had fallen asleep reading with the light still on. This meant, as I dozed, the last of my electricity dwindled away and eventually shut off, leaving the room in darkness. At perhaps around 3 or 4, I can't be sure, I woke up very, very suddenly. There was a noise. There was something in the room with me. It sounded like it was over by the window, but definitely inside. I immediately hit the light switch that was right beside my pillow. It clicked, yet everything remained dark. I quickly realized that I must have let the meter run down. Silently and carefully, my fingers fumbled around for my phone. Alas, the battery had died. As I previously mentioned, the house in Belgrave Square had a dark sense of humour regarding the timing of things. There I was in the darkness, no source of light, in my little train bed, in the corner, opposite the window, stuck, and listening to this. I rapidly ran through my options in my mind. I could get up and run, but I knew I would have trouble opening that old door, because I always did, even when it was light, and the idea of turning my back to whatever was making that peculiar sound while fumbling blindly with the latch was unbearable, even worse than the alternative of waiting it out, hidden and silent in the corner. And now you will want to know what the sound was that filled me with such horror. It was the sound of something being dragged across that old, worn, rough carpet. The sound of something being pulled again and again, The best I can liken it to is if you dragged a large sheet of Velcro across thick fabric, time and time again. It did not seem to move or go anywhere, and at times it was completely silent. I stayed frozen in bed, the covers just over my head, barely daring to breathe. I'm not quite sure how long this strange sound went on for. I can't remember, but what I do remember is the fear, pure fear, as I tried to reason with myself that it must be some sort of animal. Not one of the mice that had visited Emily and sent her running up the stairs. No, that would be too small to create such sound. But perhaps a rat of a more considerable size might do. And perhaps I had left some clothing or shoes on the floor in the middle of the room, and this rat or creature or whatever it may be wants to take them for its nest or something. Yes, that must be it. As I have said, the ancient sash windows were by no means airtight. Even when the noise stopped, I lay there, as still as the dead. I began to hear the church bells mark the time. They rang every 15 minutes. I don't know if they still do the same, but they had a chime for on the hour, a shorter one for the half hour, and shorter again for 1/4 and 1/4 I listened as every 15 minutes went by, waiting and wishing for morning. The sound did not come back, and slowly the light of dawn lit up the silhouette of the window and by degrees gave grey, shadowy shapes to the things in the bedroom, until I could clearly see that there was nothing on the floor that could have been dragged across it to make that sound. And that was all. You can believe that for the remainder of my time there, I never let the electricity run down again. When I left, in midsummer, everything was bright and airy. The sash windows were a delight to have open, and the evenings had a sense of possibility and fun spilling in from the outside with voices and people and a sense of opportunities almost sparkling electrically in the air, the way it tends to be in May and June in Ireland. The cherry blossoms had already come and gone in April, which had cheered me greatly, and Meredith had a beautiful flower pot on her windowsill. You would have found it difficult to imagine any ghostly happenings or even suspicions at all, looking up at this simple and elegant facade from beside the front door, except for the nagging feeling, once you are standing in that lilac entrance hall, that somebody is there and they are watching you.